Well, there was an interesting little piece on Politico, the Politico website the other day, regarding the super committee, the deficit commission that basically Obama put into place. And it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting read in a way. Um, well, let's just read some excerpts from this article and then go from there. Basically, the super committee that was set up was ostensibly set up to um, deal with the federal budget deficit. Okay, uh, the entire debt problem, basically. So what they're saying is, if the super committee is going to act, it is going to be this week. That's the narrative gripping Washington as the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction sits less than 10 days before its statutory November 23rd deadline to report a plan to cut the nation's burgeoning deficit by at least 1.2 trillion over the next decade. That's 10 years, by the way. Then they go on to say there are few signs of hope. Several aides involved in the process said ongoing bipartisan talks, which continued over the weekend in Washington and by telephone, have so far yielded few results. Intra-party fissures on both sides are breaking out into the open. And there's now open talk of putting off tough decisions on entitlements and tax reform and dismantling the sequester mandate, in other words, the secrecy mandate, that's really what that means, to avoid punishment, to avoid the punishment Congress created for failure, a move that President Barack Obama says he opposes. Now, I don't hold out a lot of hope, said senior Democratic leadership aide on the outlook for the House panel. People are talking, but it's not really going anywhere. Now, this whole article goes on about this, infighting within that committee. First of all, this committee is essentially, and that's my own commentary here, this committee is essentially acting in secret. These are not public deliberations on what is going to happen to entitlement programs, defense spending, or any of that. None of this is conducted in public. So to me, this is, basically the hallmark of secrecy, and we're pretty much on the way to being a banana republic, and that's one of those signs. And if you didn't know that regarding the super committee, please look it up. There are 6 panel members from either party, and of course they're chosen by their respective leaderships. Okay, and if they do not come to some sort of a conclusion, some sort of a recommendation that they can make to Congress, and Politico points this out, by the way. They're basically, what they're doing is they are saying, well, the American people are completely disengaged from this process. They're not even interested in it. They don't know anything about it. Well, maybe if our national press would actually cover the damn thing, people would know something about it. So just to remind you, at the conclusion, okay, if this super committee doesn't come up with any recommendations, then certain cuts to certain programs will go into effect automatically. Now, if you look at those cuts in terms of entitlement spending, some of these are totally automatic. They will not touch, from what I've heard, in a major way, some of the major programs, but they will completely eliminate others. So it's kind of making inroads, into things. More than likely, this will gut Medicare, the program for the very poor and disabled. Basically, it will cut it down to the bone. It will require massive cuts in Medicaid. I'm sorry, I got that reversed. So Medicare, Medicare is basically the insurance program for the elderly and the disabled. Medicaid is the program for when people fall through the cracks and when they're desperately poor, okay, or disabled. Medicare is long term. Medicaid is more short term. Okay, so Medicaid essentially is going to be gutted. And then going on to Social Security, they say, well, that's not really going to be coming into the picture via these automatic cuts. But rest assured, the push is going to be for privatization of that program, even though this program had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with our federal deficit. Nothing. In fact, the federal government borrowed from those funds because those funds were actually solvent. So look up some things regarding Social Security, because anybody that tells you that this is some massive pyramid scheme should think twice. The biggest pyramid scheme out there is Wall Street and their financial instruments and derivative trading. That's the big pyramid out there. So if you think you're going to make more money by privatizing your retirement plan and putting it all into Wall Street, well, guess what happens? When the market crashes and you're nearing retirement and you have everything in that market, you have lost everything and you're shit out of luck, especially once all these basic social programs are going to be cut back. Now, it's not couched in these terms here in the United States, but you can see anybody that's paying, attention to what's happening globally can see what's happening in Europe as well. And this is not, these kinds of things that are going on here are not called austerity measures, although that's precisely what it boils down to. These are austerity measures which are being pushed down the throat of the American people in favor of the banksters, the big banks, which would have been completely insolvent without the input of taxpayers' money, okay? While they themselves, enjoy 0% interest rates by getting their money printed from the Fed. So yes, that's going to be a big plan here in terms of the super committee, because it's essentially it's set up in two ways. Either those huge cuts in so-called social services are going to be brought out immediately, or it's just going to be brought about by default. It all boils down to the same thing. Because no matter what you think, our politicians, our elected officials, so to speak, are no longer representing the people. They are completely beholden to the international banks and banking cartels and the, big global corporate conglomerates. Those are the people who are calling the shots. So if at this point you're still naive enough that your vote in the voting booth counts in terms of national elections, I think you're being mistaken. On the national level, what's happening is the same type of austerity programs, the same type of neocon and liberal bullshit, neoliberal bullshit, economically that has been happening over the last 35 years across the globe. Only now it's going to hit Western, let's call ourselves maybe developed societies. You know, I'm not sure how developed we actually are if we're in favor of all of this, because it's going to hurt everyone, except of course for the very super rich, and who now have the audacity, like these banks. You know, that should really be a separate video, because it's the figures out there are just amazing. So I'm going to leave that for another video. But yeah, the super committee was essentially set up to make it palatable to the American public that austerity for the middle class, and especially for the poor, needs to happen right away. Because you see, these banks, these big banks, too big to break up, right? They are not going to take a loss on their fraudulent investments, outright deception, or just stupid manipulations of the market. They're not willing to do that. So they have captured our government, all of our regulatory agencies, per se. And so that's really who's running the show. I mean, if this is not obvious to most people by now, and I'm in total agreement, by the way, with Ron Paul ending the Fed. Of course, I mean, the Fed is a big part of the problem, because it's essentially a private institution. It's not run by the people or for the people. No, it's run by private banksters, or bankers. You know, what? But the Fed itself is just part of a larger problem. That's all I'm trying to say. So yeah, look out for austerity measures. I can pretty much tell you that living standards in the United States, across Western Europe, and all of that is going to deteriorate in a pretty fast pace during the next 2 decades, unless there's some sort of complete economic collapse. You know, these the shysters are going to keep lying to us some more, so you know, it's going to be an up and down kind of thing, and the whole thing is basically non-sustainable anymore, and eventually it will collapse. It's just a matter of time, and when that time comes, things are going to be hard for everyone that I know. If you think 2 years of unemployment are bad, you haven't seen anything yet, because those who have nothing left are those who have nothing left and nothing else to lose. And as Gerald Celente points out, and I'm not a big fan of his, but he does understand to some degree the human condition. You know, once people have nothing left to lose, they're going to go for it, and that's when you're going to have massive uprisings, and that's totally unpredictable. You know, and you don't know where that's going to go, but that's basically what we're facing everywhere across the globe. And I'm not even going to get into peak oil and all of that. You know, that's basically, that downslide is going to happen after my generation is dead, it's going to be a huge problem for our children and our offspring anywhere across the globe. And it is what we're facing here is completely unsustainable, and it will not have a good ending. So I think the more local we can go, the better it would be. That's not to say that that's going to work out either, but you know, once the global corporations start messing with your food supplies and your water supplies, you're going to be in a world of hurt because there's nothing you can do about it. And the time to get active about this is now and not 10 years from now. So wean yourselves off all these little luxury goods would be my suggestion. You don't need a new iPod every year. You don't need big screen TVs anymore. All of that, once the blackouts and brownouts start happening in this country, you'll be lucky just to have a functioning radio left. So I'm not trying to paint a bleak picture. I'm just saying all of this, is a very, very strong possibility. And people who have, never lived in a situation where they were ever deprived of anything, they simply cannot imagine that. I grew up in very, very poor circumstances, and we had enough to eat, a roof over our heads and all that, but there weren't any luxuries at all. And you can live without the luxuries, but you can't live without food or water or heat or any of that, I'm just saying, keep that in mind. And I don't know, maybe I'll make another video in the next few days. Thanks for sticking with me. That's to my usual subscribers, and if anybody else comes across this video, that's fine too. They've kind of eliminated the news and politics or activism, nonprofits activism from YouTube. So I think I'm going to put it under, I don't know, I guess I don't have a choice now. I'm either going to be putting it under people or education, maybe entertainment, if that's what it takes. Okay, good night.